welcome the remilitarized zone, Bombshell.
Hello there, and welcome to this thing. This is not a good Robottal. We don't know what it is yet. Something to do with the teams. Like, we'll come up with a name. It's pending. But anyway, I am your Robot Wars fanatic, Harry, and joining me is
your BattleBots expert, Charlie, and
Mike Jeffries, team captain of the Chaos Corps, driver of Bombshell, and a 10-year-plus robot combat competitor.
Yep, this is the first guest on here, Mike. I gotta thank you a lot for doing this. And also, I'm from Georgia, and also you're from Georgia too, so it means a little bit more to me because of the fact like you've been on BattleBots and done all this great stuff to help represent the robot combat scene here in the state.
Yeah, it's been a great experience doing that. The whole team we've got is based mostly in Georgia. We've got a couple members up in Tennessee, but all of us have been building robots and fighting against each other for years prior to doing BattleBots, which I think is part of why we worked together so well. We've ripped each other's own stuff up, and now we're all coming together to make something cool as a team.
So when did all of the robot combat begin? Like the building of robots, when did you realize, I want to start doing this? What inspired you to do it?
For me, I saw BattleBots, the original series, back when it was on Comedy Central when I was in, I think, middle school at that point. So, fairly young kid, no idea what I was doing, but I decided I wanted to build one. So I spent quite a few years going on to online forums and things like that back when Facebook wasn't really a thing that everyone used, and started trying to figure out how to build a robot. That didn't really go that well.
Yeah, that sounds like... It's the whole thing, isn't it, with when you go up through building robots, that you start off with just whatever you can make, and then eventually you start getting better and better and better. It's the same with anything,
It's very much one of those things where each robot you build, you learn something, and that gets into the next robot, and you learn something on that build, and it keeps building and building, because you don't jump right from nothing to Bombshell. You start with this fairly simple thing that sort of works, then you go into something that's a little more complex that also sort of works, and eventually, if you keep with it long enough, you get to something that really does work well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's a in Robot Wars, in the World Series, they make this whole comment about all the different weight classes that you can get for robots. So did you guys start off with how they said about the whole amp weights into the beta weights and the light weights, and then you kind of go up from there?
So I went not the smartest path through the weight classes. I started with a 60-pound robot. This was actually the first attempt at building a fighting robot that would have been potentially for season 6 of the original run of BattleBots. Show got canceled just after I'd gotten the drive system actually working. It would have been terrible. It would have lost its first fight. It would have been just sprayed across the arena. So gutted it, built a new thing, took it to Robo Games. It got a win, then it lost. It was an okay robot. It wasn't a great design, but I stuck with it since then and have been doing a lot of smaller events where we're doing 30 pounds and under since then, either in the Northeast or now in Georgia and the Southeast of the U.S. And that's where I've really built up a lot of the design techniques and abilities that I've got now.
Yeah, I can definitely see that in quite a few of your robots, especially Nick's, one of your robots that you have, and also just other ones throughout the years. A lot has been developed through robot battles down in Georgia. Can you tell us something about that, like that whole scene?
Yeah, the robot battles scene and the community involved is... The robot battle scene and community is a pretty amazing thing. So one weird little quirk of robot battles is there really aren't entry fees. There's not really this level of super seriousness when you get to the bigger robots involved, the 12 and 30-pound classes, because a lot of what we're doing is we're putting on a show. We do it at DragonCon, at MomoCon, at other conventions dotted around the Southeast. And there's this aspect involved where not only are we building these robots to fight each other, but we're also in effect performing for the audience because we're part of the show. And I think that's driven a lot of unusual designs and a little bit of a different approach to combat than you see in some other areas. And I think that's part of why Robot Battles has existed since 1991. It's the second oldest robot combat competition in the world, as far as I'm aware, with the only one that predates it being Critter Crunch, which is a Colorado-based competition.
That's amazing. It's like, because when people think of the earliest things about robot combat, they think of either the original BattleBots or Robot Wars, or if they even go further back, the American Robot Wars back in the mid-90s. But 1991, that is astonishing.
Yeah, and that's a 3-year gap between the first Robot Battles and the first Robot Wars. And Critter Crunch, actually, I believe, started in 1987.
And then also, another note on the building thing is that on Near Chaos Robotics has a very, very in detailed handy guide to building robots, which I think is a really fantastic resource. Is the fact that you went through this time and actually listed, like, here's websites where you can find parts. Here's the various elements of various weight classes and what that means.
And part of why I've got that up is I was lucky enough back when I was getting started to actually meet up with Greg Gibson from the Yeti team. And he had a couple years experience in robot combat on top of me at that point. And he was able to really help me learn a lot of the basics to get involved. And I actually ended up being on his pit crew for a couple of events and things like that. And he helped weld the frame of the first 60-pound robot I actually got into an arena. So the amount of learning I got from him, there's kids out there who don't have the luck to be right next to a builder. So I wanted to put that out there. That way, if someone's trying to figure out how to do this, they can go find a lot of that advice and a lot of the information I got and that I learned early on in an easy to get to place.
I think there is a sort of general stigma amongst literally anything, is that when you want to know something and you want to talk to the people who are notable, the people who have made a name in that particular thing, in this case, robot combat, you kind of feel like you can't talk to them, like they're in this sort of other class, and that you think, oh no, I'm just a fan and I don't know, and I need to like learn it for myself. But one thing I think is so important is that it isn't quite like that. You can just talk to people and they will give you their advice, they will help you out, because at the end of the day, we were all like that once.
Yeah, and from a personal perspective on this, the one thing I want is more builders, because the more builders we've got, the more robots we're going to have, and the better the events are going to be, and the better the events are, the more sustainable this is going to be in the long run. And that means more robot events, more awesome fights, and it's also a great way for especially kids to learn a lot of interesting and useful skills that they can apply in the rest of their life.
Absolutely. Do you think that robot combat is going to last the test of time? Do you think that, we will still see it in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years even?
I wouldn't be surprised if it's around until things have gotten to the point where it doesn't make sense to have it in its current form anymore. Like, I don't think you're going to see robot combat just vanish. I think you're going to see it either evolve or continue as it has been, but with new technology being integrated into it for a long time.
One thing that I really do appreciate is that you actually champion the smaller weight classes. I feel like a lot of people, when they first see shows like BattleBots and Robot Wars, they want to jump straight into the heavyweights, but you can do it, but I think it's a lot of conventional wisdom says, like, it's wiser to start on smaller weight classes and build your way up. That way you can get the knowledge, you can get some refinement in there before you move on to the bigger machines.
Yeah, nobody starts as an expert, and part of why the lower weight classes are so useful is any mistakes you're going to make are a lot less expensive to fix.
Exactly. Do you mind going over like some of your smaller weight class robots? Like, I know, like this one like Nyx, Aljos. I hope I pronounced that right.
Going through the full list is going to take a moment because I think it's up at like 25 or 30 now. So I'm going to focus on mainly the highlights because I've built a lot of these things over the years. So the first robot I actually put into an arena that fought was called Ruiner. That was a 60-pound angled bar spinner, and it was okay. It won its first fight, blew up its weapon motor, bought a new weapon motor, put it in, got high-centered in the next fight, and this is back in the 75 megahertz days. So the opposing robot drove around behind my high-centered robot and cut my antenna off, and the fight was over.
That actually,
Wow.
Sorry to quickly interrupt, but there's I just wanted to ask, what is it like to win a fight, like to win your first fight?
So I think for me, it was a relief at that point that it didn't break. Because the big issue I'd been dealing with that robot was reception, because 75 megahertz radios get interfered with metal, and I was having massive range issues, and the fact that it managed to finish a fight was probably more important than the fact that it won the fight to me at that point. And that's one thing that I don't think the quote came across right on BattleBots when they played it, but that I was trying to say after our fight with Poison Arrow is I'd rather risk losing a fight that's spectacular than win a fight that's boring. So actually, this is a good point to jump back to the next robot I built that was kind of worth mentioning. And so after building that bar spinner that kind of wrecked itself, I decided, all right, I've taken the wrong approach to this. I'm going to build something simple. So I built a 12-pound wedge bot called Apollyon. And up until very recently, Apollyon was my most successful robot. It was, very basic wedge, high-power drivetrain, fairly durable front. First event I took it to, it was in Greensboro, North Carolina. It ended up winning the 12-pound tournament in a round robin format, and took a little bit of damage, but overall was in pretty good shape. Decent little bot, not great. Then a couple months later, BattleBots announces they're doing the event they ran in 2009 that was intended to be on CBS College Sports Network. And one of the things they've got is a high school and a college bracket for 15-pound robots. So renamed it Interstellar Overdrive, made a big steel rear bumper for the thing, took it to California and fought at that event. 2 fights into the event, half the drivetrain gearbox strips out. Problem is, I was using a discontinued gearbox, so I didn't have any spares, and I ended up having to fight the rest of the tournament with a one-wheel drive wedge. And trying to make those fights entertaining was terrible.
Were people entertained, though? Did people enjoy it still?
So I somehow went 5-2, ended up 4th place across 30 some odd teams, and got the best engineered robot. And it was, I think, not so much exciting as it was silly, because the only thing I could do was do what's referred to as crab walking, where you go full throttle forward, slam it into reverse, and that whips the other side of your robot around. So it's like shimmying across the floor. So I was just desperately hurling the face of the robot into my opponents to try and do something. And I think the fights were at least pretty funny, if not necessarily exciting.
Hell of a spectacle, though. Like, that's the whole thing with wedge bots and why I love them, because it's just that full force just ramming into things. It's just like, I don't like you being here, I'm going to make you move.
A good wedge can make for a great fight. A bad or slow, boring wedge bot is generally going to make for a bad fight. But if you've got something that's got the speed, has the aggression to really bring the fight to the other robot, it can make for a very exciting match. And I think that's one thing that's kind of necessary with that style of bot. And that's why over the course of the 3 versions of Apollyon I'd built, I just kept cranking the power up. By the time it was done, it was a mix of aluminum, magnesium, and titanium for all of the armoring. Had about 3 horsepower worth of drive, and was able to wheelie from a standing position on the carpeted arena at DragonCon.
But yeah, that also Apollyon made it into the Robot Arena 2 DSL mod, so people can actually play it in video game format.
Yep, as well as the robot that I built following that one, sort of. So Moros wasn't originally Moros. That's the 30-pound angled bar spinner, actually loosely based off my original 60-pound robot I built. And it started life as a robot called Mr. Self-Destruct, which was a rather prophetic name because in testing, it had I think it was about a 12-pound steel bar and a 30-pound robot. It was a terrible idea. But the wheels were at the rear of the bot with the angled bar, and I was doing some testing in a big empty parking lot.
Oh, dear.
And it started to lift the nose because of the gyro force. And the moment the bar hit horizontal, the chassis twisted, and it completely ripped itself apart.
Oh my god.
I think an entire, probably third of the robot landed about 75 feet away, and had flown directly over my head.
Now, when was this? Because, I mean, the health and safety, obviously now with robot combat, I mean, it's crazy.
This was the moment for me that really changed my approach to doing a lot of testing, and is why I built my own test box for even some of the smaller robots I've built since then. And that robot turned into Moros, which was still a terrible idea, but at least it held together for the most part. And it didn't have a great record. I think it had 2 wins over 3 tournaments I took it to, 2 or 3 tournaments, and it had this nasty tendency to eject its motor controllers. Because with that angled bar you'd hit, it'd throw itself in the air, and the entire chassis would be spinning at 900 RPM.
That sounds
a bit of a terrible idea, but it was exciting.
Sounds exciting. Yeah, it sounds like it was a fun thing to watch.
Yeah, it put on a great show, but it was really expensive to keep working. That eventually got stripped and turned into the first Nyx, which was a fairly robust little tank of a robot, fairly heavily based off of Tornado, with a couple of interchangeable front attachments. And that was the start of a pretty effective series of designs. The Nyx V1 actually later got retired, got turned into a 30-pound wedge bot called Styx, which then went to Motorama and went 5-0 through the one time I took it up there.
Wow.
And it was just, a couple of DeWalt drills on the drive, heavy AR400, equivalent to Hardox 400 steel plow on the front. And it was just a tank of a bot.
If Nyx is what I'm thinking of, is it in the robot Wars Robot Arena 2 mod. There's like
So the second version of Nyx is in that with the axe
yeah,
attachment.
that one with the axe attachment. Because I mean, I freaking love that robot. Yeah,
Yeah, the axe is a lot of fun. The lifter is by far the most effective weapon for that version of Nyx. And then the crusher is just some good fun.
Actually, like when you look at Nyx, at least the second version, you can definitely see bits of like eventually went into Bombshell, especially with the lifter and the axe design.
The way I like to look at it is Bombshell, in many ways, is a combination of Nyx and actually a 1-pound robot I built called Algos, which is a compact vertical spinner with a big feeder wedge. And that's what really inspired the vertical disc module on Bombshell.
So going on from talking about your lightweight robots, Bombshell, let's talk about the one which everyone knows by this point. So why did you come up with the idea of having the interchangeable weapons for Bombshell? Where did that come about? Because that's one of the things which I think made Bombshell really stand out in BattleBots.
Way back when we found out that Season 1 was happening, a couple of the other robot battles builders and I had started talking about, we should try to get something together for the next season. Because we figured, Season 1 goes well and the ratings were looking great at the time. Season 2 is bound to happen. And if we're going to be on it, we need to come with something pretty interesting. So we kicked around a lot of different designs and looked at what the rules were as far as what was and wasn't an active weapon. One of the things we'd actually discussed prior to settling on the Bombshell general concept was a melty brain style spinner, sort of like how Nuts 2 is able to navigate while spinning, but with solid weapons and integrated flamethrower, so you'd have this ring of flame moving about the arena. Was an idea we'd been playing around with.
They would have loved that. Like, just imagine just ABC just eating that up for BattleBots.
Problem is,
technically,
it's not an active weapon.
Uh,
So our next spot there that we were looking at was, all right, what kind of designs have we already built that we know we can make that we think would actually make for good TV? Because one of the early things we were talking about is, this is a TV show. We know it's a TV show, and we want to make sure we're entertaining because TV shows don't last if they're not entertaining. We had a question that the whole team had to answer is, are we building a robot with the goal of winning the tournament? Or are we building a robot with the goal of getting a toy made? And we decided our goal was to get a toy made. And, we figured with the interchangeable weapons, that's like you could sell the accessory kit and you can have all the different versions available. And,
It's like a little penknife. That's what I always remembered, like Bombshell being. I just loved how it had all of the different, like sort of Swiss Army knife sort of thing. I loved it, how he had all of these different things that could be attached onto it. Like, I freaking love the Cobalt, that spinner that gets Cobalt's tires. I thought that was genius.
That was such a crazy idea, and none of us knew it was going to work. Going into that fight, we'd barely really tested it. We'd spun it up to make sure it worked. We'd cycled the raising and lowering mechanism to make sure it worked. But that was the first time we'd actually hit anything with it. Where do you test that safely?
That's true. It was such a cool idea, though. It looked great, and I think Dave Morse was probably like, "Oh God," when he saw that. But here's my question to you: is that if Bombshell went up against Carbide, could the same thing have happened again, or do you think Dave Morse would have made sure that didn't happen?
I think he would have changed his strategy if we fought again, and realistically, we'd probably change our strategy. Part of why I think that big horizontal bar worked as well as it did is we had the element of surprise. Nobody was expecting that thing to exist, let alone work. So we turn up with this crazy looking thing that looks sort of like an angry horse with a mustache. And we put it in the arena and it just looks weird. All the senses of proportion are just completely and utterly wrong. Our center of gravity was actually in front of the front tires, which is why we had those little steel outriggers. That was the only way it would drive without just dropping the nose into the ground constantly.
That's very clever. Do you think, though, that, let's say like the Series 8 version before they went crazy with Carbide, do you think that version of Carbide could have been a similar sort of fight to how it was with Cobalt, or do you think that Carbide would have torn you to shreds?
So I think if they hadn't ever seen Bombshell and went in with the Series 8 Cobalt, it probably would, or Carbide, it would have been pretty much the same fight. Because I think what would change between the Cobalt fight and any Carbide fights is the strategy.
That's interesting. So he hasn't changed the tires so much as to kind of like make sure it doesn't happen again, but he may change his tactics. So
yeah, I think the tactics would change and that would change the fight.
Oh man, I'd love to see a rematch. And I imagine that if we get a season 3, that we'll hopefully get to see Bombshell take on whatever new robot we're getting from Dave Moulds.
I think there's a lot of really good fights that are lined up to happen should season 3 happen with all the teams that come back and all that sort of stuff. So right now, we've got a design for the new Bombshell done because we have to completely rebuild after season 2. We're gearing this design towards being able to be built quickly because we're not expecting to have a lot of time once everything is official to actually get the bot built to ship. And our view is it's not a matter of if season 3 is going to happen, it's a matter of when.
That'd be fantastic. I would definitely love to see Bombshell return. And also, I'd love to see, if Hexbug keeps their deal, see a Bombshell toy eventually, because I know I've got a bunch in the back there, and I know that would make a fantastic little collection. It's just having Bombshell where you can like just swap the weapons and everything. But that actually does raise a question I wanted to ask is, the lifter, I guess considering the various opponents you had, it wasn't ideal to use the lifter. What kind of opponents would in season 2 would have been ideal for the lifter to use?
We actually wanted to use the lifter against complete control, but we were having some issues with that lifter. We'd used a worm drive as part of the gear reduction, and we were getting too much friction out of that stage, and we weren't able to get a full lift with the setup we had. So we'd actually decided prior to the start of the tournament that the lifter was basically going to be stuck on the shelf, and we'd have actually run that against complete control. Basically any non-spinners, that lifter would be in the top 2 for our selection. Would have been great against Red Devil, would have been a lot of fun against pretty much anything that didn't have an active spinning weapon. I would have loved to fight Overhaul with Bombshell with the lifter module.
Ooh,
that would have been a lot of fun.
That means so good. How did you feel about getting into, season 2? You're in, all great, you go up against complete control, and you lose. How did that feel? Because obviously before you got the wildcard spot, that was it.
So going into the fight, we had, or at least I had a bit of a thought that if both robots left the fight working, there was a good chance we were both getting into the next round, one way or the other, as long as we put on a decent show. So we picked a non-spinning weapon so we could run our drone, because we knew production wanted to have the drones in the arenas, and that was our best chance to use it, because, what's complete control going to do to the quadcopter? And either with the axe or the lifter, we can have a very high energy back and forth sort of fight where it's really good TV and it's a really good fight for the crowd. And we can show off some things that haven't been seen in the arena before.
And it was a fantastic fight. I especially love the throwback you had by putting the little present box on the top of the axe of Bombshell. Didn't have anything in it because of the rules, but
behind the scenes at BattleBots, we were actually pitted directly next to the complete control team. So we find out that we're going to be fighting them, I think, a day and a half before the match is scheduled to happen. So they're suddenly looking at all of our different weapons and trying to figure out what on earth to do. Because each one of them has a completely different approach to countering the weapon. And what we do is we start working on one weapon, they'll start working on the counter to that, and then we'll switch to another weapon to work on for a bit. And kept cycling through for about a day and a half.
No, they call him Dirty Derek Young, but it sounds like you were doing the dirty tactics there. So that's amazing.
We spent about a day and a half working on different weapons over and over, and I feel a little bad about it because they looked exhausted by the time it was all done. Because by the time the fight was scheduled to happen at the end of the Tuesday filming session, they'd built countermeasures for every single configuration we had. And they had them all on a cart ready to be bolted on at the last minute.
God bless. That's amazing, though, isn't it?
And we were staged for the fight. They'd finally seen what weapon we were going with. During this entire time, there's been this gift wrapped present sitting in our pits. They asked one of the other people on the team what it was, and he said it was a gift for his son. And then suddenly the present is stuck to the axe over by the arena. And we were planning to actually take it off the axe and give it to them before the fight. Production asked us to leave it on as a throwback to the last season after making us swear on, everything they had at hand that there was nothing in the box.
That's some great psychological mind tactics right there.
So it actually gets even better. And
oh, God.
So we're staged. We're the next fight up Tuesday night. We're the last fight of the night. Complete Control goes to do the check of their systems. And when they turn the valve for the propane, it starts venting all over backstage. Apparently, there was a connection that didn't get hooked back up while they were working on all the different countermeasures for us. So they just vented the entire propane tank backstage Tuesday night, and we had to evacuate the arena essentially. So a fight gets postponed. We end up being the first fight Wednesday morning, and they had to spend, some time Tuesday night, Wednesday morning getting everything all fixed. So we're pretty well rested. They're just ragged at that point, I think.
It definitely made for some interesting moments. I know it was like a very good back and forth fight. I know like Complete Control got that pretty great grapple on you where it lifted you up in the air. Mercifully, they actually didn't do that much damage. It melted away like some plastic on the front, like some material.
So the extent of the damage from that fight was 1 or 2 of the PWM cables going to our motor controllers, and that's why the drivetrain was being kind of weird and twitchy at the end of the fight. Is it was actually shorting the signal wire against one of the other wires on the PWM cable. And then the only other real damage was the big urethane bumper on the front for the axe that got kind of melted.
Once you got that fixed, though, at least you were secure with the wild card and everything. And then you got to the Cobalt fight, where that was, like I think we mentioned that before, that was just some fantastic tactics right there, especially using that bar spinner. What other robots, because I know you used it against Tombstone as well, what other robots do you think would have been great to go against with the bar spinner?
So one of the things we actually specifically made sure of with that bar spinner is that we could outreach Ice Wave.
Oh.
So we had the elevation at our maximum height, and the length of the bar was 42 inches, that we could completely clear his bar and get to his weapon motor above the bar before he'd touch us.
So a brutalizing version of de-icer, basically.
Pretty much. So that was one of the design elements we had, is we wanted to make sure with something like that we could actually reach it before it could get anywhere near us.
That would have been beautiful. I don't know if like Paul may have like mentioned to you his plans for Biforce Season 2, but like let's say if he like brought the Biforce he won with, what you guys would do if you had to go against him.
So if it had been working, that would have been a great one for us to run the lifter on, because I think, again, like if we'd fought Overhaul, that would have been amazing fun. I've fought that style of fight before. With what we had working, I'd have probably ran the vertical disc, because Bite Force doesn't really have the Season 1 Bite Force doesn't really have a great counter to a vertical disc.
And then, of course, after the Cobalt Bombshell fight, we get to the Vertical Disc Saga, which I think made some of the best moments of the entire season. Especially with
Red Devil was a beautiful bot on top of all that. Yeah, and it's one of those things. Jerome is a fantastic builder and designer, and he decided to do something absolutely crazy, and it worked. Nobody in their right mind would have said, all right, if I'm going to go win BattleBots, I'm going to build Red Devil. He decided he wanted to build something that looked amazing.
It did. Of course, the advantage you had was that massive leading wedge at the front of the disc. He wasn't able to get any reach on you, because the thing is he had to get you like tucked underneath. And that's also, I think, something I want to mention is how important honing in your driving skills are.
Yeah, in a sense, that's probably my least favorite fight of the whole event. From how I like to fight, that was pretty terrible. Because we spun up, we got that first hit, and it was a great first hit. I mean, I think he did a full cartwheel, essentially, by the time he'd stabilized. But what had happened is one of the battery leads had desoldered on the hit. We were in a lot of trouble at that point, because if he did really any damage or got any kind of control, or even was able to be particularly aggressive, we were probably going to lose on a judge's decision. So at that point, I just went, all right, we've got no weapon. I'm going to make this as exciting a fight as I can possibly make it with a giant wedge, and we'll see what happens. I wasn't expecting to win that fight. I was expecting to try and just, put on the best show we could with what happened.
I love driving matches. I think they're far better than, you look at the other side of that, which is those short, like 10-second, 15-second matches of where it's just like spinner versus spinner, bang, done.
I'm pretty much on the same page. As far as my approach, I prefer a fight that's two really good drivers just battering each other for the full length of time or near the full length of time. And you can only watch the same car crash so many times, but when you start getting the back and the forth and the momentum shifting, it really draws you into a fight. And I think you need the one-hit KOs, but you also need those back and forth fights, because you need to have that diversity of action to really keep people's attention.
Do you feel that BattleBots Season 2 of the ABC one, do you feel like it had too many spinners in it? Do you feel like there should have been a bit more of a variety of weapons, or do you think it was actually quite a suitable amount of spinners?
I don't think the balance was too far off. I think it'd be great to see more non-spinner designs, particularly non-spinner designs that end up performing well. But it's a really hard thing to predict ahead of time. So I think it's going to take a little bit of people trying out weird things and finding this new approach to beating the spinners.
Yeah, see, I appreciate the ones that's kind of like with Bombshell and Yeti, of where it is a spinner. Like Bombshell obviously has a spinner, but sometimes it doesn't. And like with Yeti, it has the forks, which it uses sometimes instead of the spinner. And I love that. I like, dual weapons, different things being used.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really do love about robot combat in general is there's no one answer to how to win. If you get the right timing and if you get the right draws in the bracket and all that. And I think one thing that kind of goes to your point about how Bombshell is a spinner, but it's not really like the massive spinner is the goal of the disc isn't damage, it's control.
Yeah, and I think that's why I love Bombshell. Like, I haven't got to see ABC Season 2 in, sadly, all of its glory. I have got to see, highlight reels, and Bombshell, from like the moment I saw it, especially when it tore up the tires of Cobalt, I was like, I love that robot. That's awesome. Like, I love just seeing those robots that are they have a little bit of innovation. They don't go for something that's a safe option. They think, do you know what? How can we change this up? And that weird, crazy horizontal spinner that you put on Bombshell, like you didn't know if that was going to work, and yet you did it because you thought, well, it's entertaining, it looks good, and also it's a bit of fun.
And there was another bot with a similar level of modularity that was at Season 2. They just had less luck than we did in the draws, and they didn't get the wild card. That was Ultimo Destructo.
Oh, yeah.
And I think they had an axe, a pneumatic flipper, and a horizontal bar, if I remember correctly. They'd been out of the sport for a while. Built a pretty decent robot, given how long they'd been away from the sport. And I suspect next season, they'll be coming back with something that's a lot more likely to go far into the bracket.
Here's hoping. Because I really did enjoy Techno-Destructo on the original series. I also just really love bots that capitalize on that concept. It's where almost kind of creates like this psychological warfare mind games type deal on the opponents.
Tornado's kind of like that as well, isn't it? With when they had the anti-razor cage, the anti-pit device, everyone's like over. And then you got they had like an anti-spinner device they were going to have. They had obviously the blade, they had the ram front. They had so many different options, and like that's way back in like Series 6. That's I think 2002.
And kind of a cool thing, if you trace back, Bombshell was inspired by Nyx, which came out of the original Nyx, and that was inspired by Tornado. So there's a bit of a logical progression going from Tornado all the way through Bombshell. And that's kind of cool. I actually got to talk with Andrew Merchant at BattleBot Season 2 a bit. That was one of my favorite robots from Robot Wars during the original series.
The thing is that what I really hope is that, like Tornado, like how it lost to Razor the first time they met, and they kept losing to Razor. Eventually, they overcame Razor and they won. And I really hope that one day we see Bombshell beat Tombstone. I think that'd be a fantastic, just a thing to see. That I think Bombshell gets kind of destroyed in the grand final.
Yeah, we have to do a complete rebuild after the final with Tombstone. It's pretty much all of the damage to raw material and wheels. So the actual cost of that loss is pretty low, so we can salvage a lot of components.
I think one thing that maybe people may not know about is that y'all actually were close to getting Tombstone. I think it was like if the bar was about maybe like an inch or two in one direction, it would have been able to hit on the like the housing for the weapon chain and just knock that out.
So what it was is with the with how far forward that center of gravity was, we had to have the outriggers shaved down a bit so we could have grip and drive around. And the amount of wobble front to back the chassis had covered a wider range than his chain. So we've actually got a pretty decent notch out of the weapon hub on Tombstone from the first hit. And there's a grazing blow above the weapon chain from the second hit.
I think even beyond that, my favorite moment seeing Bombshell was the great drum spinner smackdown of 2016, where you were able to do the 1-2 punch on Poison Arrow and Minotaur. Especially like where with Poison Arrow, you were able to hit them and fling them over into the screws. That I think was one of my favorite hits of the entire series, just because of how explosive it was and just how perfectly they landed right in the back of the screws.
Yeah, that whole fight was a lot of fun. So we knew going into the fight that they were having an issue with the software on their weapon motor controller. So my whole strategy going into that fight is I wanted to be on top of them as fast as possible and keep them trying to spin up. Because if I kept hitting them anywhere, it was going to throw them off kilter, and it was going to give us the chance to get that winning blow. Pretty early into the fight, I got behind him and actually set him up against the wall. And at that point, I kind of backed off. One of the things I tend to do is if I think the fight might be over, I'll tend to back off and let the other person decide, do they want to try to continue? Do they not? So they've got their drone flying around and they're trying to set us on fire. And then they make a decision that makes my decision really easy. They try to unstick poison arrow with the drone, and the drone lands. So I turn bombshell, aim it at the drone, and just full throttle right into him and blow up the drone. It unsticks them, so the fight gets going again. I think they only had like 1 or 2 seconds left on the count out. And then luckily I was able to get a couple of good blows in, and then that final hit that punted him up into the arena wall and then down into the screws. And I really want to hear what the live mic from Chris and Kenny was. I have a sneaking suspicion what went out on TV is not what was said in the moment.
No, it probably would have not made it past network censors. Oh man.
That fight was a lot of fun. It was really cool seeing the gigantic gouges our tooth took out of the chassis on Poison Arrow. Because there's on one side of it, there's just a 2-inch wide slot from one of the hits from the disc. Sadly, we never found that piece. So for us then, we're like, cool, we got through this fight. Who do we get to fight next? And I think this was before the Minotaur Bronco fight. Pretty interested in who's going to be the winner. I'll admit, I was actually hoping Bronco would come out on top because I think our vertical disc would have worked fairly well against Bronco. But I know how good Riobots is. I know how good of a driver Daniel is. And I know how well built that machine is. And it's going to be a rough fight. I know which weapon we need to run to have a chance, and that's the vertical disc. Because I've run vertical disc against Rum a lot of times in smaller weight classes, and I know how to work that fight. Luckily, my wife Julie had a 1-pound drum robot called Clazo that's actually a very similar shape and weapon to Minotaur and Toro Maximus. And we've fought each other quite a few times at smaller events.
So using your previous experience to get one over, that's fantastic. To just it's just the whole thing is that, you may have screwed up in the past, but you kind of learn from that mistake. And you when you're in the fight again, you think, okay, no, I'm changing my tactics this time. I'm doing a different approach. And it results in a completely different outcome.
Having fought Julie's robot so many times helped with is I knew Toro Minotaur had 2 different potential front wedge configurations. They either had the dual spikes or they had the solid bar wedge that they could put on the front to try to counter our wedge. I knew if they had that bar on the front, all I had to do was get one hit on that and it could lock up their drum. So I kind of figured they probably weren't going to run that. With the spikes, I knew all I had to do was get them gyroing and we were under them every time because that's exactly the configuration Clazo uses.
So Minotaur's quite small as well. I mean, isn't it compared to like Toro Maximus, which is a bigger version of Minotaur? Or am I?
So per pound, I suspect the footprint of Minotaur and Toro Maximus is a lot smaller than the average heavyweight because it's such a dense bot with super thick frame members and a really heavy steel drum that there's not a lot of room to build it large. So everything's packed in tight. It's super dense, and it's really durable. And I think that might have actually helped us out in this fight a little bit, because there was this one hit about 2/3 of the way through the fight where they come up our wedge, and we get kind of an uppercut maneuver on their drum, and they go flying straight backwards and land. And something, when they landed, busted one of their drive gearboxes, from what I understand. That's, I think, when the fight really turned to us being the probable winner. And there was one other moment in that fight that made the difference. I forget if it was before or after the hit that broke the gearbox, but I got a hit on the side that folded over. I think they were upside down at the time, so it folded out their base plate, and the wheel that was on the side that got folded was the one that was still working. So when they gyroed around, when they finally landed, I think it was right side up, they were high centered.
God,
that's impressive.
How did the crowd react to that?
Honestly, I don't remember. I get such tunnel vision during fights, particularly at like BattleBots, that I'm completely unaware of pretty much anything outside of the arena.
You must be so focused, though, because like the thing is, for us watching it as viewers, we're watching it and we see the entire thing. But when you're actually driving the robot, you must be focusing on that robot so much and exactly what is going on that you must completely zone out of everything and not even like realize you've won sometimes.
For me, I'm usually pretty aware of where the fight's at. Like, I'm usually pretty good about keeping track of how long's left in the fight, things like that. During a fight, especially like BattleBots, I was completely tuned out from the cameras and basically anything that was non-essential to the fight itself. I was actually told by one of my teammates after the Tombstone fight, apparently a chunk of Bombshell hit the wall right above my head, and I was completely unaware of this.
That's how you know you're focused right there. But honestly, I remember like you mentioned Greg Gibson teaching you a lot of things. That kind of makes me think of like how, as far as BattleBots Season 2, like you and Yeti, I think were like two of my favorite stories because you two were such underdogs. It's like you had, your big names like Bronco, Minotaur, and Tombstone, and of course you had the favorites like Witch Doctor, the Champ by Force, and then you had like this massive open field of people who were at least new to that ABC season, and then you two come out and just work yourselves up through the ranks and end up in the top 4.
Yeti was a reserve as well, correct?
Yeah, Yeti was either reserve or alternate. I forget which terminology, but he wasn't in initially. And he showed up with no spares because there was no time or money to get spares. He managed to pull that bot through the entire tournament, borrowing parts from other teams. In his fight with Tombstone, he actually had one of our spare axe motors running the drum.
Wow.
And I was pulling for Yeti so hard in that fight because that would have been such an amazing story to have, two people that had the relationship we had way back when, where he was actually mentoring me when I was getting started in the sport. A decade plus later, in the finals at BattleBots, that would have been such a cool story. I have no idea what we would have done because by the end of the Minotaur fight, we were down a tooth on the disc. The welds holding the wedge to the attachment brackets were all cracked. And we had to cycle all of our batteries and rebuild half the drivetrain. So we had like no time to figure out any kind of weapon repairs on the vertical, which meant we either had the axe or the horizontal bar, or to very, very quickly repair the disc. Probably would have just ended up taking off the other tooth to get the disc roughly balanced and going, well, we'll see what happens.
You went for, was it the horizontal bar you went for in the end? I can't quite remember the final fight.
Yeah, we ended up going with the horizontal, which was actually a really lucky call. We were getting a lot of pressure to get the bot ready because, it's the final day of taping. We want to get this filmed. So we're rebuilding half the drivetrain. We're trying to get all the batteries topped up because we'd managed to actually damage a couple of our packs. So we'd shown up with a full set of spare batteries. We were down to 4 spare batteries of the 6 we needed. And then we get the drivetrain together, go to the test box, and one of the wheels isn't turning. So we're trying to figure out what the problem is. And my immediate thought is, I wonder if something happened with either the motors or the motor controllers. How can I very quickly check to figure out which it is? So pulled one of the armor panels off, swapped the leads from the front motor and rear motor going to the motor controllers. Front motor was on the rear motor controller, and now we at least had the correct wheels turning. So it was one of the motor controllers had died, and we didn't realize that after the Minotaur fight. And what it is that fight was so high intensity, we'd actually gotten the solder on the boards warm enough that it had reflowed and some of the FETs had come off of the speed controller. So, and I think part of it is after Minotaur broke the tooth off, all the vibration mixed with the high temperatures, it just kind of shook everything apart.
Holy crap.
So you guys didn't really fancy your chances against Tombstone, I'm guessing.
I figured we were going in there to make it as good a show as we could, and whatever happened, happened. I think we got in about 3 hits before we were at the point where we couldn't really do much anymore. It was a pretty amazing experience to do it, and we were going into the whole thing hoping we might win a fight. We didn't go there thinking we're going to win this thing. We went there with the idea that, we're going to put on a good show, whatever happens.
You absolutely did. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I'll say another thing I want to touch on, you mentioned earlier, is your wife's also involved in your team, that she also competes with robots herself. I kind of wonder, how it is, it's kind of interesting, to see, how's that dynamic work where you're also teammates, but also sometimes competitors, and then also did you get her into robot combat, or did y'all two meet because of robot combat?
I got her into robot combat not long after we started dating. So this was actually not far before Mr. Self-Destruct exploded. She was actually there during that test. And I'd been working on designing her, her own robot to run. Because Julie's got a background in jewelry and metalsmithing, so more the artistic side of doing crazy things with metal as opposed to the engineering side of it. And she's been getting more involved in that. She actually now works as the customer advocate for Big Blue Saw. So she deals with all of the CAD stuff people send in and helps turn people's ideas into actual real parts, which is pretty cool. It was, I think, a couple of years before we ended up with robots in the same weight class that drew each other. And, we don't hold back when we fight each other. We go full bore and try to beat each other as bad as we can. She'd be mad if I threw a fight. I'd be mad if she threw a fight. And we're both going into this trying to put on the best fight we can. So we're going to go and tear each other up if we can. And every time we fight, she gets better and better and closer and closer. And part of, I think, why I've tended to win more than she has is she also tends to gravitate towards wilder designs. Like her 30-pound robot, Spanky, that we've actually just recently retired, is a crazy machine. The entire electrical system and body of it fits within the diameter of the wheels, and it's got modular weapons, sort of like Nyx does, but they're crazy weapons. We've got a 10-inch circular saw, we've got a handmade chainsaw, and we've got these grabbing jaws.
I love those robots where it's just like you don't understand how it quite works, how on earth someone can drive something, and how you can have that sort of thought process. Like, I just think that's sometimes way more interesting than just seeing a robot that's just, your typical flipper or your typical spinner. I love seeing those robots where it's like, yeah, but how do you drive that? And yet somehow they do.
Yeah, and right now we're actually working on some concepts to replace. She's recently retired both her 1-pound and her 30-pound robots. So we're working on some concepts at the insect and the 30-pound scale to replace those that are still going to have some of that flair, but will also actually be reasonable to compete with the goal of being, she's driven some incredibly hard to drive robots for a long time and has been getting to the point where she's a pretty good driver with those. So when she's actually driving something that's sort of sane to operate, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
No, absolutely. And I mean, we're probably going to have to end it here because I'm getting very tired because it is nearly 2:00 here in England. So before we do finish off, Mike, is there anything else that you want to say? Any tips for any people who want to be aspiring robot builders, or just people in general where they can find you?
So easiest way to get in touch with me is either through the Chaos Core Facebook page or the Near Chaos Robotics Facebook page. Chaos Core is the BattleBots team. Near Chaos Robotics is my personal team that myself, Julie, and a few friends of ours are on. If you've got any questions, feel free to send them my way. The other thing you should look at is if you want to get involved in robot combat, there's a group I've been helping organize called SPARC, Standardized Procedures for the Advancement of Robotic Combat. We've got participating events all over North America as well as Australia, and it's providing a up-to-date rules set for events that's free to use. We've got some guides on building arenas, kind of a look through what is currently out there and what is and isn't a good idea. We've also got what's called the Getting Started Guide, which walks through the entire process from I want to build a fighting robot to I'm in the pits at my first event with the fighting robot I've got. And all of the little details that you don't normally see. The website for that is sparc.tools. And that's the group's website. There's a form there. There's a drivetrain calculator based off Steve Judd's calculator that he produced many years ago that's got some more up-to-date motors put into it. And we've also got a version of BotRank hosted there, which has event results from all over North America and pretty much anywhere that bothers to submit event results that are 1v1 fights. So you've got a lot of the history of the sport captured in that as well.
God bless you, Mike. God bless you for doing all of this.
Oh, yeah.
We'll leave all of those links down in the description. You can go check them all out. Give Chaos and Mike all of your support. It's fantastic having him here, and we can't wait to hopefully see you again in BattleBots Season 3, whenever that may happen.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great time.
Been a real pleasure,
has.
Mike. Thank you, and hopefully we'll see you again on Good Robottal. But until then, I've been Harry.
And I've been Charlie.
You've been watching whatever the bloody hell this is. Thank you very much, and good night.